Okay, so this video is on fractions, decimals, and percentages. And more specifically, it is changing fractions to decimals, changing decimals to percentages, and changing percentages back to fractions. So basically, changing between these different proportions. So as you can see at the top here, we've got three different methods, and it goes around in a cycle. So we can, if we're starting with fractions, okay, we can change that into a decimal by dividing the top number of the fraction by the bottom. Okay, if we want to change a decimal to a percentage, all we need to do is times it by 100. And to change a percentage back to the fraction, we put it over 100, and then we simplify the fraction. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to practice each of these steps, okay, one at a time. So we're going to start with the easiest ones, which I think is going to be decimals to percentages. So to change decimals to percentages, my method is going to be to times by 100. So the example's asking me to convert 0.45 to a percentage. So I'm going to do 0.45 times by 100. And if you remember, okay, timesing by 100 will make this decimal point move 2 places down the number. Okay, so my answer is going to be 45%. Right, have a go at these questions down the bottom here. Okay, so pause the video, have a go at those, and then I'll go through the answers and we'll see how you've done. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at this now. I'm just going to run through the answers. Okay, so firstly, 0.82, remember our method is to times by 100. So timesing this by 100 gives us 82%. The next one, 0.2 times 100. Okay, this time it will give me just 2%. Okay, so 1.24 times 100 is going to be 124%. So as you can see here, we can have percentages over 100. It just means that the thing you started with is going to be bigger. The next one, 0.175 times 100, will give us 17.5%. Okay, so sometimes we can have percentages that have decimals as well. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is changing percentages to fractions. Now, we do this by putting the percentage over 100 and then simplifying. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the example, I want to convert 60% to a fraction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 60 and I'm going to write it as a fraction over 100. Okay, so I've got a fraction there, 60 over 100. So usually the questions will ask you to convert it into a fraction, but in its simplest form. So you will get a mark for this, but you want to make sure that you're simplifying it where you can. Now, if you notice, 60 and 100 are in the 10 times table. So I can divide both by 10, and if I divide 60 by 10, I get 6. Divide 100 by 10, I get 10. So simplified down, I get 6/10. Now, just double check that the fraction that you've just made will not simplify again. And if I have a little look at this closely, I notice that they're both even numbers on the top and the bottom. That tells me that they're in the 2 times table. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to divide both by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So again, I'm going to write my new fraction out nice and neatly, 3/5. I'm just going to make sure that I can't simplify that anymore, which I can't, so that is my fraction. So 60% is the same as 3/5. Okay, have a go at these percentages down the bottom. Remember to simplify where you can, okay, and then we'll go through the answers in a little bit. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at those. I'm just going to run through the answers here. The very first one, again, remember my method. I want to put it over 100. So 27 over 100. Now I'm just going to double check. Can I simplify that? No, I can't. So I'm just going to have that as my answer. Okay, so the next one, I've got 45. I'm going to put it over 100. Now, hopefully you notice that these are both in the 5 times table, so I can divide both of them by 5. 45 divided by 5 is 9. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So I'm going to write my new fraction out now, which is 9/20ths. Just going to double check that I can't simplify those, which I can't. So that is 45% as a fraction. The last one, going to start again like I've done before. 32, write it over 100. Okay, I've noticed that these two are even, so I can divide both of them by 2. 100 divided by 2 is 50. 32 divided by 2 is 16. So I'm just going to write that out, 16 over 50. And again, just double check that these don't simplify again. And they're both even again, aren't they? So we're going to half it again. So 16 halved is 8. 50 halved is 25. So my answer here would be 8 over 25. Now let's just make sure that that doesn't simplify, which it doesn't. Okay, so that there, 8/25 is the same as 32%. Okay, so the last part of our cycle, we're going to look at changing fractions to decimals. And this is probably one of the hardest parts because it's going to involve dividing and using the bus stop method. Now, my method here is I want to divide the top by the bottom. Now remember, a fraction is made up of the top number, which is the numerator, and the bottom number, which is the denominator. So let's have a little look what happens when I want to convert 1/8 into a decimal. So firstly, what I want to do is I want to have the top, the numerator, divided by the bottom, the 8. Okay, so in order to divide, okay, especially if it's a tough one, I want to use the bus stop method. So I'm going to draw my bus stop out. And I'm going to make sure that the thing that I'm dividing, which will be the bottom number, goes on the outside. Okay, and the top number, the thing that's being divided, is going to go inside the bus stop. Now I'm going to be dividing by 8. Now a nice little tip to help you to do these divides is to write out the times table of the number that you're dividing by. So this is 8. So I'm just going to quickly write out the 8 times table here. So I've got 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, 64, 72, and 80. So now that I've written out the 8 times table, I'm ready to attempt the divide. So first off, I'm going to say, how many 8s go into 1? And hopefully you realize that I can't make any groups of 8 from just one thing. So I'm going to end up with a 0 on the top, go into the decimals, and I've got 1 left over. Now, usually we've got a number to put our remainder on when we're doing our bus stop method dividing, but here we've got nothing to put our remainder on. But luckily for us, nothing is actually a number. If you remember, nothing is actually the number 0. So I'm always going to have a new 0 to put my remainder on. So now I'm going to look and say, how many 8s go into not 0, but how many 8s go into 10? And as hopefully you can have a little look and see that 1/8 goes into 10 with 2 left over. Remember, I've got a 0 that I can put this remainder on. So now I'm going to look and say, how many 8s go into 20? So 2/8 go into 20, which gives me 16. And I've got 4 left over. Remember to put that on a new 0. So lastly, I'm going to say, how many 8s go into 40? And that's 5. Now, because I've got no remainder, that means I'm finished. And 1/8 actually is 0.125. Okay, so have a go at the questions below. Okay, convert those fractions to decimals. And we'll go through the answers in a moment. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at these now. Okay, let's go through them. Right, so first off, remember the method is top divided by the bottom. So I'm going to do the top number divided by the bottom. So I'm going to draw my bus stop out, and if you remember, I'm dividing by 5, and I'm dividing 3 by 5. So the 5 goes outside, and the 3 goes inside. So it will be helpful to have the 5 times table written out. Okay, so 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. Right, so again, it's going to start very similar to the one in the example. All right, so I'm going to start off, no 5's going to 3, with 3 left over. And remember, I'm going into the decimal, so I've got to put my decimal points there. So the 3 goes on to a 0. And how many 5's go into 30? Well, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with no remainder. So my answer is 0.6. Hopefully you got that one. So the next one, I'm going to do 3 divided by 4. Remember the top divided by the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to draw my bus stop out. Now I'm dividing by 4 and dividing 3 by 4. So I'm going to write out the 4 times table to help me out. So 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40. Okay, so again, it's going to start off very similar to the other 2 questions that we've done. No 4's go into 3, with 3 left over. Remember, going into the decimals, let's put the decimal points in. Okay, so I've got a 0 that I'm going to put my 3 onto. How many 4's go into 30? Well, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I can't go more than 7 because otherwise I'll go past 30. Okay, so 7 with 2 left over. So that 2 is going to sit on a new 0. And how many 4's go into 20? Well, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my answer is going to be 0.75. Okay, so the last one is the hardest. Okay, again, we're going to do 3 divided by 8. So I'm going to draw my bus stop in. Okay, we're dividing by 8, and we're dividing 3 by 8. So I'm going to put my 8 times table up again. Okay, so 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, 64, 72, and 80. Okay, again, it's going to start off very similar to the other ones. No groups of 8 can be made from 3, with 3 left over. Put our decimal points in. Okay, so the 3 is sitting on top of a 0. So how many 8's go into 30 to start off with? 1, 2, 3. And we can't go beyond 3 because otherwise we'll go above 30. So 24 we're sitting on. That must be a remainder of 6 then. Put a new 0 on. How many 8's go into 60? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. With 4 left over. New 0. How many 8's go into 40? And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 3 8's is 0.375. So we've just looked at changing fractions to decimals, and we've previously looked at changing decimals to percentages and percentages to fractions. But what would happen if I wanted to change a fraction to a percentage, like in my first example? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make use of this wheel on the right here. Okay, so firstly, I'm going to change a fraction to a decimal, and then I'm going to change that decimal to the percentage. So I'm just going to start off by changing 2/5 to a decimal. Now we've just covered this, so hopefully it should be fresh in your heads that we're going to do the top number divided by the bottom number. So that's 2 divided by 5. Remember, we need our bus stop for this. Okay, and 5 is going to sit outside because it's doing the dividing, and 2 is being divided, so it's going to sit inside. Okay, now you should be quite used to the fact now that it starts off with a 0, okay, and the first remainder is the number itself, 2. Okay, and also hopefully you're happy with the fact that these are now sitting on brand new zeros that we're bringing into our bus stop each time. Okay, so I want to do 5 into 20. Now, I could write out the 5 times table, but I think we're okay with that now. So how many 5s go into 20? Okay, and that would be 4. So 2/5 is 0.4 as a decimal. Now the question's not asking for me to give it as a decimal, it wants it as a percentage. So if you remember at the very beginning of the video, we changed decimals to percentages, and the method for that was to times by 100. So we're going to do 0.4 times 100, which gives us our percentage, 40%. Okay, so the second example, okay, I want to change a percentage to a decimal. Now, usually I would say change a percentage first to a fraction and then to a decimal using this wheel on the right here, like I did for the fraction to percentages. But actually, if we think about it, there is a much easier way to change a percentage to a decimal. Okay, so if I want to change a decimal to a percentage, it is times by 100. If I want to change it back, I'm going to do the opposite, the inverse, and that's going to be to divide by 100, which I think is a lot easier than first simplifying a fraction and then dividing the top and the bottom using the bus stop method. Okay, I think it's much easier than that. So, converting 34% to a decimal, we're going to do 34 divided by 100, and that gives us an answer of 0.34. Okay, so I want you to have a go at changing fractions to decimals and to percentages, or decimals to percentages and to fractions, or percentages to fractions and decimals. Okay, so I would like you to fill in the table down the bottom here with all of the different things that are missing. Okay, so give that a go and I'll go through the answers in a moment. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at this now. So let's do the top line first. Okay, so firstly we want to change 4/5 to a decimal. So if you remember, that is 4 divided by 5. Put your bus stop in. Okay, 5's doing the dividing, 4 is being divided. We start off with 0, put our points in. We've got 4 remainder on top of a new 0. Okay, so how many 5's go into 40? And that is 8. So 4/5 is 0.8. Writing that as a percentage, we need to do 0.8 times 100, which is 80%. Okay, so the next one, I want to change 0.7 first to a percentage. So if you remember, this one is 0.7 times 100. 0.7 times 100 is 70%. Next, I want to change this 70% into a fraction. If you remember, that is 70 over 100. Remember, we put the percentage over 100 to turn it into a fraction. And we simplify. So we've got to look what times tables 70 and 100 in. And hopefully you've spotted that it's the tens. So we're dividing both by 10. 70 divided by 10 is 7. 100 divided by 10 is 10. So we get the answer of 7/10. Put that in our table. Okay, and lastly, we want to change 15% to a fraction and to a decimal. Okay, so changing to a fraction, we've just covered that one. 15 over 100. Remember, we're looking for any times tables they are both in. Hopefully you've spotted they're in the 5s. So 15 divided by 5 is 3. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So 15% is the same as 3/20. Okay, and lastly, okay, we want to change it to a decimal. Now we could do 3 divided by 20, but if you remember, it's a lot easier to do 15% and divide it by 100, which is 0.15. 0.15. So hopefully you got those right. Remember to practice this whenever you can. So if you get a score on a test, practice changing that into a decimal or percentage. Okay, if you see a decimal out in the real world, okay, see if you can change that to a percentage or a fraction. And the same thing if you see a percentage. See if you can convert those into fractions and decimals just as extra practice.